Snake is in for another richly cinematic, occasionally convoluted, but ultimately satisfying adventure in Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. It's been several years since the last Metal Gear Solid game, and in many ways, much has changed, but in other ways, the series hasn't changed much at all. This is still a game that puts a very, very heavy emphasis on storytelling, often at the expense of gameplay. During the first several hours of the game, you barely even play it at all. You're just listening to a lot of exposition that's actually rather slow. So if you're new to the series, this game probably won't sell you on the whole Metal Gear Solid 3 thing. You'll probably feel like fans of this series, of which there are legion, are kind of crazy, because what do they see in something like this? But Metal Gear Solid fans know what the secret is. It's that these games always have some sort of really crazy story and some really impressive twists and unique cinematic moments that really make the whole experience worthwhile. And Metal Gear Solid 3 does all this. It features a great story, one that's probably a lot better than that of MGS2. It introduces some really cool new characters and has some spectacular boss battles. Some of the boss battles in MGS3 are the best that have ever occurred in the series yet. The game's mechanics actually haven't changed much since Metal Gear Solid 2, and they've aged noticeably during these past few years, just because they do some weird stuff with the camera, and you can look around from the first-person perspective, but you can't move, and a lot of the buttons have pressure-sensitive functions, so, you know, whether you take a guard hostage or slit his throat all depends on how hard you push down the square button and stuff like that. But it really, once again, gives you a whole variety of different moves that you can do and some interesting stuff that you can pull off. All this stuff is cool, but you also don't ever really come to a point where you need to use it. Generally, you're just trying to stay hidden from enemy guards, and even if they do spot you, it's pretty easy just to mow them down and then find a quiet spot where you can wait until the alert stands down. And then you get into the game's boss battles, where it really does encourage you to experiment and to think, though you can always just call your commanding officer on your radio and he'll offer some friendly advice. So the action and the stealth really comes to a head at these points, and they're the game's strongest moments from a gameplay standpoint. As previously suggested, though, MGS3 takes a while to hit its stride. Part of the reason it just can take a while to get into is that the game sports this weirdly kind of absurdist, self-aware and self-deprecating sense of humor that's going to be like good for a lot of nudging and winking laughs for hardcore fans of the series, but if you're new to this series, you're just going to be bewildered at the weird in-jokes and things like that. But ultimately, it's fortunate that the humor seems to fall by the wayside at about the halfway point of the game, and the story basically gets serious and takes place in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis during the 60s. And without spoiling anything, it basically revolves around Snake trying to rescue this brilliant Russian weapons specialist. But of course, things get a lot more complicated and more characters are introduced, such as the villainous Colonel Volgin, who's this Russian madman, and his various cohorts, including the Cobras, who are this elite commando unit who comprise many of the game's boss battles. The game's best characters, though, not including Snake, are the boss, who is the Snake's mentor, and also Ocelot, who fans of MGS will remember as the crazy, eccentric Russian gunslinger. So these characters display a level of depth to their personas that's uncommon in other games. They're really quite interesting. So if you bear with it and you're an MGS fan, you're really going to get into this story and will probably really grow to like the boss as well as Ocelot and Snake as characters. One of the obvious differences between MGS3 and its predecessors is that this game takes place in a lot of natural environments and not just in the claustrophobic corridors that have been the hallmark of the series. When you're out in the jungle, you have to do such things as stalk through the dense overgrowth and really hunt people because you no longer have your fancy radar to rely on. The game also introduces a camouflage system to let you stay hidden better. Basically, all you do is you access a menu and switch between different uniforms and face paints, and this makes you more or less hidden depending on the type of environment. You could get to a point where you're basically completely invisible if you're lying prone, and this lets you set up for some cool close quarters combat action where you can sneak up on a guy and put him in a vice grip or stab him and all kinds of nasty stuff like that. Should you yourself get hurt, there's now this new curing system for treating serious injuries like gunshot wounds and burns and stuff like that. This too is pretty abstract. You just go into a menu and use a few kind of bandages and sewing kits and stuff like that, and you're good as new. You could even do this in the middle of a boss fight. The other new system in the game is the necessity of having to eat to regain stamina. Soon enough, you're going to be carrying basically a whole zoo in your backpack of all the little animals that you've either tranquilized or stabbed or something like that. And as soon as your stamina meter runs low, you go into the menu and you eat one, and that's pretty much all there is to it. All in all, though, this game's gameplay is tried and true. If you're familiar with the gameplay of MGS2, you can expect a sort of a similar experience here, especially if you've gotten to playing MGS2 without the radar on. In addition to the main story mode, though, there's also the snake versus monkey mode, which is suitable for all ages insofar as you don't kill anybody, but instead you knock out ape escape monkeys and you capture them. It's actually pretty fun and a good way to practice some of the mechanics of the game. MGS3's presentation is superb once again. The graphics are really impressive, and some of the in-engine cutscenes are especially so. The character models on display here are some of the best in the business, even though the lip syncing isn't that great, but all in all, this is one of the best looking PS2 games available. The audio is another highlight of MGS3 and is basically impeccable. There are actually some kind of spotty voice performances, but they're definitely of the caliber of previous Metal Gear Solid games, but the ambient sound, and especially the soundtrack, is just really impressive. Metal Gear Solid has always aspired to be more than just an action-adventure game. It's always had these sort of postmodern storytelling elements, and it's always tried to do more than the average game and really tried to push the envelope as far as what could be done with the whole game medium. And if you've enjoyed these elements of the previous games, then you'll find them once again in MGS3, which has these moments that in and of themselves are worth the price of admission. With all that said, I ultimately think that Metal Gear Solid 3 isn't going to change anyone's mind about this series. If you love it, you're going to continue to love it. You're going to really enjoy this story, and that's the side of the camp that I happen to be on. If you don't love it, if you think it's just way convoluted and crazy, then the game is going to push you away the same as the previous installments have. But you know what? That's okay. This game knows its audience. It's well established with its crowd, and that crowd is really going to enjoy what this game has to offer.